January fog rolls thick over Portland, Maine, muting the morning light into a flat gray wash. At 7:43 a.m., the temperature hovers at 28 degrees, cold enough that exhaled breath hangs visible in the air. The sound of tires on wet pavement echoes down Congress Street as early commuters navigate toward downtown offices. In this coastal city of 66,000 residents, winter mornings carry a particular quality: hushed, orderly, predictable. On January 24, 2006, that predictability shattered. Jennifer Kesey, a 24-year-old financial analyst at Merrill Lynch, left her apartment building on Munjoy Hill at precisely 7:40 a.m. Security footage captured her stepping through the lobby door, wool coat buttoned against the cold, leather briefcase in one hand, phone pressed to her ear with the other. She was speaking to her younger brother, Logan, confirming dinner plans for that evening. "I'll grab the wine on my way home," she said, her voice clear and unhurried. "See you at 6. The call ended at 7:42. Jennifer walked toward her silver Honda Accord parked in the resident lot, visible on the exterior camera for exactly 11 seconds before passing out of frame. What happened in the next 3 minutes would become the central mystery of one of Maine's most haunting cold cases. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Portland's Old Port District hums with a particular pride. Cobblestone streets preserved from the 1800s, brick warehouses converted into galleries and restaurants, a working waterfront where lobster boats still unload their catch each afternoon. It's a city that balances maritime grit with New England refinement. Residents know each other's routines. They wave from storefronts, save parking spots during snowstorms, gather at coffee shops where baristas remember orders by heart. Safety isn't questioned here, it's assumed. Jennifer Kesey had moved to Portland 8 months earlier, drawn by a promotion at Merrill Lynch's regional office. She rented a one-bedroom apartment in a renovated Victorian on the eastern edge of Munjoy Hill, a neighborhood climbing toward the old observatory tower. Friends described her as meticulous, tax documents filed alphabetically, grocery lists organized by store aisle, workout schedules color-coded on her kitchen calendar. She jogged the Eastern Promenade Trail 3 mornings a week, attended a monthly book club at Longfellow Books, and never missed Sunday brunch with her parents in nearby Yarmouth. On the morning of January 24th, nothing seemed unusual. Jennifer had returned from a weekend trip to Boston the night before, arriving home around 10 p.m. She texted her roommate from college confirming safe arrival. Her car, freshly washed despite the winter slush, sat in its assigned spot. The apartment lights went dark by 11:15, visible to a neighbor walking his dog. Everything followed Jennifer's precise patterns. Yet when Logan Kesser arrived at her building at 6:07 p.m. for their planned dinner, his sister's car was gone. Her apartment door was locked. Calls to her cell phone rang 6 times before diverting to voicemail. Logan stood in the building's lobby, confusion hardening into concern. He called their parents. "She wouldn't just blow off plans," he said, his voice tight, "not without calling." Their father, Drew Kesey, drove from Yarmouth immediately. By 7:30 p.m., both men stood in the parking lot, scanning empty spaces under amber streetlights. Jennifer's designated spot, number 22, clearly marked, held nothing but tire tracks in the slush. Drew pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The operator's calm questions felt surreal against the rising panic in his chest. "How long has she been missing?" 6 hours, maybe 7? Any signs of struggle? None visible. Does she have a history of leaving without notice? Never. Portland police arrived within 12 minutes. 2 officers emerged from a patrol car, notebooks in hand, their expressions professional but measured. They asked Drew and Logan to walk them through the timeline. Jennifer left for work at 7:40, confirmed by building security footage. She called Logan at 7:41. The call lasted 90 seconds. After that, silence. No activity on her credit cards, no response to texts or emails. The officers exchanged glances. One wrote something in his notebook, then looked up. "We'll file a report, but you should know, most adults who go missing turn up within 24 hours. Could be a miscommunication, a spontaneous trip." Drew's jaw tightened. "My daughter doesn't take spontaneous trips. She plans everything." The officers nodded, promised to escalate if Jennifer didn't surface by morning, and left. In the empty parking lot, father and son stood beneath a flickering streetlight, breath clouding in the January cold. The city around them continued its evening rhythms. Cars passing, a distant train whistle, someone laughing in a nearby apartment. But for the Cassie family, time had frozen at 7:42 a.m., the moment Jennifer's voice vanished from the phone line. Logan pulled his coat tighter. "Where did she go, Dad?" Drew had no answer. He stared at the empty parking space, at the tire tracks already beginning to freeze, and felt a weight settle into his bones. The terrible knowledge that something fundamental had broken, that the ordinary morning his daughter had walked into would not lead to an ordinary evening. Somewhere between the lobby door and her car, Jennifer Cassie had stepped into a void, and Portland, with all its cobblestone charm and maritime safety, had no explanation to offer. As night deepened, the temperature dropped to 22 degrees. Ice formed on windshields. The fog thickened. In the Cassie apartment, Drew sat on his daughter's couch, surrounded by her carefully organized life. Stacked magazines, a half-read novel bookmarked on page 103, running shoes aligned by the door, everything in its place. Everything except Jennifer. He picked up a framed photo from the side table. Jennifer at her college graduation, cap tilted at a jaunty angle, smile bright with promise. The glass felt cold in his hands. Outside, Portland carried on, unaware that one of its own had vanished. The question hung in the frozen air, unanswered and terrifying. Where is Jennifer Cassie? By 8 a.m. on January 25th, Drew Cassie stood in the Portland Police Department's lobby, exhausted and insistent. Jennifer had been missing for 24 hours. No calls, no sightings, no activity. The desk sergeant directed him to Detective Michael Brennan, a 15-year veteran with the Major Crimes Unit. Brennan listened as Drew recounted the timeline, took notes, and made a decision. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was an active missing persons case. Within an hour, 2 patrol officers arrived at Jennifer's apartment building to review security footage. The building manager, a wiry man named Phil Donahue, led them to a cramped office where monitors displayed camera feeds from the lobby and exterior lot. He queued up footage from January 24th, 7:30 a.m. At 7:40, Jennifer appeared in the lobby, coat buttoned, phone to her ear, walking with the brisk efficiency that characterized her mornings. She pushed through the glass door at 7:40. The exterior camera caught her crossing toward the parking lot, visible for 11 seconds before she moved beyond the frame. "That's it?" one officer asked. Phil nodded. "Camera covers only the entrance and front lot. Her spot was around the side." The officers exchanged glances. Jennifer had walked out of view and never returned. They requested a copy of the footage, marked it as evidence, and left. By noon, Detective Brennan had assembled a small team. They canvassed the building, knocking on doors, asking residents if they'd seen or heard anything unusual on the 24th. Most recalled nothing. Morning routines, coffee, commutes. But a woman on the 3rd floor, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, paused when shown Jennifer's photo. "I saw her most mornings," Eleanor said, leaning against her doorframe. "Always left around the same time, punctual as a Swiss watch." "Did you see her on the 24th? Eleanor frowned, thinking. "I looked out my window around 7:45. Saw her car still in the lot, but when I checked again at 8:30, it was gone." Brennan wrote that down. Sometime between 7:45 and 8:30, Jennifer's car had left, but there was no footage, no witnesses to the actual departure. He thanked Eleanor and moved on. By late afternoon, the team had conducted 32 interviews. No one had seen Jennifer after 7:40. No one heard screams, crashes, or disturbances. She had simply dissolved into the morning fog. Meanwhile, the Cassie family mobilized. Drew, his wife Joyce, and Logan printed 500 flyers with Jennifer's photo and description. 5'6", 125 lbs, shoulder-length brown hair. Last seen wearing a navy wool coat and black slacks. They plastered them across Portland, coffee shops, bus stops, grocery stores, the Old Port District. Friends from Jennifer's book club joined the effort, spreading flyers through Majoy Hill. By evening, Jennifer's face looked out from dozens of storefronts. A local news crew arrived, filming Drew as he taped a flyer to a lamppost on Congress Street. "Jennifer is organized, responsible, and loved," Drew said into the camera, voice breaking. "She wouldn't leave without telling us. Please, if you've seen her or know anything, call the police." The segment aired on the 6 p.m. news. Tips began trickling into the police hotline, mostly well-meaning but vague. Someone thought they'd seen a silver Hyundai near the mall. Another caller mentioned a woman matching Jennifer's description at a gas station. Brennan's team followed up on each lead, but none led anywhere concrete. On January 26th, 72 hours after Jennifer vanished, the case took its first significant turn. A maintenance worker at a mid-rise apartment complex on the western edge of Portland called police. A silver Honda Accord had been sitting in the visitor lot for 2 days, untouched. The license plate matched Jennifer Kessie's vehicle. Detective Brennan arrived within 20 minutes. The complex, called Huntington on the Park, sat 3 miles from Jennifer's apartment, a 12-minute drive under normal conditions. The Honda was parked neatly in a visitor spot, slightly askew, but not abandoned looking. Brennan circled the car, peering through windows. The interior appeared undisturbed. A gym bag sat on the back seat. A travel mug rested in the cup holder. The doors were locked. Brennan called for a forensic team. Within an hour, the car was cordoned off with yellow tape. Technicians in latex gloves carefully opened the doors, photographing every inch. They dusted for fingerprints, collected fiber samples from the seats, and examined the trunk. Inside the trunk, beneath the spare tire, they found something that stopped them cold. A small, dark stain on the carpet liner, roughly the size of a quarter. It could be oil, coffee, or something far more sinister. The sample was sealed in an evidence bag. On the driver's seat, a single strand of hair, longer than Jennifer's, lighter in color, was carefully collected with tweezers. The technicians worked methodically, knowing this car was now the epicenter of the investigation. Every fiber, every print, every molecule could be the thread that unraveled the mystery. Drew and Joyce Kessie arrived as the forensic team finished. They stood behind the police tape, staring at Jennifer's car. Joyce's hands trembled. "She loved that car," she whispered, "kept it spotless." Brennan approached them, his expression carefully neutral. "We're going to process everything. The car will give us answers." But even as he said it, a cold weight settled in his gut. The car was here. Jennifer was not. In his 15 years as a detective, that equation rarely ended well. The forensic examination of Jennifer Kessie's Honda Accord took place in a temperature-controlled bay at the Portland Police Department's evidence facility. Detective Michael Brennan stood behind a glass partition, watching technicians work under bright halogen lamps. Every surface of the vehicle was photographed from multiple angles. The dashboard, the seats, the floor mats, the trunk liner. The process was meticulous, almost surgical in its precision. By late afternoon on January 27th, preliminary findings emerged. The dark stain in the trunk tested positive for blood, human blood. The quantity was small, barely 2 milliliters, but enough to extract DNA. The sample was sent to the Maine State Police Crime Lab in Augusta with a rush order. Results would take at least a week, possibly longer if complications arose. The single hair from the driver's seat, light brown, approximately 8 inches long, was also submitted for analysis. It didn't match Jennifer's known samples from her apartment hairbrush. Brennan reviewed the fingerprint report. Dozens of prints lifted from the steering wheel, door handles, and dashboard belonged to Jennifer. But on the rearview mirror, technicians found a partial thumbprint that didn't match her profile. It was smudged, incomplete, likely belonging to someone who adjusted the mirror after Jennifer last drove. The print was run through Maine's automated fingerprint identification system, then escalated to the FBI's national database. No matches returned. The discovery that troubled Brennan most was what was not in the car. Jennifer's briefcase, the leather one she carried in the security footage, was gone. Her cell phone, which she'd been using at 7:41 a.m., was missing. Her purse, wallet, and keys were nowhere to be found. Yet her gym bag remained on the back seat, undisturbed. The travel mug still sat in the cup holder, half full of cold coffee. Whoever moved the car had been selective. taking items that could identify or track Jennifer, leaving behind objects without immediate value. The Kessie family received updates in fragments. Brennan met with Drew and Joyce at the police station, carefully explaining what the forensic team had uncovered. When he mentioned the blood in the trunk, Joyce's hand flew to her mouth. Drew's face hardened, his jaw working silently. How much blood? A small amount, not enough to indicate a fatal injury at that location, but enough to know she was hurt. Brennan nodded. There was no point softening the truth. We're treating this as a potential abduction. The blood, the missing personal items, the car moved 3 miles from her apartment, these aren't consistent with Jennifer leaving voluntarily. Logan, who sat beside his parents, leaned forward. What about cameras at that complex where you found the car? Did they catch anything? We're reviewing footage now. The complex has security cameras covering the main entrance and parking areas. We're hoping to identify who parked Jennifer's car there. That hope materialized 48 hours later. On January 29th, a forensic video analyst named Rachel Kim called Brennan into the tech lab. She had spent 2 days combing through footage from Huntington on the Park. At 11:52 a.m. on January 24th, roughly 4 hours after Jennifer was last seen, her silver Honda entered the complex's visitor lot. The car moved slowly, deliberately, parking in an empty spot near the perimeter fence. Brennan watched the grainy footage. The driver's door opened, a figure stepped out, closed the door, and walked toward the complex's rear exit. The camera angle positioned to capture license plates filmed the person from a low perspective. The individual wore dark clothing, black or navy pants, a hooded jacket pulled up, head angled down as if aware of the camera. They moved with purpose but not haste, hands in pockets. The entire sequence lasted 11 seconds. Then the figure disappeared beyond the camera's range. "Can you enhance the image?" Brennan asked. "Get a look at the face?" Rachel shook her head. "I've tried every filter. The hood and the angle block the face completely. I can tell you approximate height based on the car door reference, between 5'9" and 6 feet. Build appears average, not particularly heavy or thin. Gait suggests male, but I can't be certain." Brennan replayed the footage a dozen times, searching for any identifying detail. The jacket had no visible logos. The shoes were dark, possibly sneakers. The hands, briefly visible as they closed the car door, wore no rings or watches. Whoever this person was, they'd been careful, almost professionally so. The discovery of the footage both advanced and complicated the investigation. It confirmed Jennifer hadn't driven her own car to Huntington on the Park. Someone else had. But that someone remained a phantom, a faceless figure who'd managed to avoid identification despite being captured on camera. Brennan ordered the footage released to local news stations. By evening, every channel in Portland aired the grainy clip, asking viewers to call with information if they recognized the person's walk, build, or clothing. The tip line lit up immediately. Over 200 calls flooded in within 12 hours. Most were speculation. Neighbors accusing neighbors, ex-boyfriends, co-workers with grudges. Brennan's team worked through each tip methodically, following up on anything remotely credible. A caller claimed to recognize the hooded figure as a contractor who'd worked on buildings in Monjoy Hill. Detectives tracked down the contractor, interviewed him, confirmed his alibi for January 24th, and cleared him. Another tip pointed to a delivery driver who frequently parked at Huntington on the Park. Same process, same result. Cleared. Meanwhile, public attention intensified. Jennifer's case dominated local news. The Portland Press-Herald ran a front-page story. Financial analyst vanishes. Police seek hooded figure. The article detailed the timeline, the abandoned car, the mysterious driver. Community groups organized search parties, combing parks, wooded areas, and waterfront paths. Volunteers walked the Eastern Promenade, where Jennifer used to jog, calling her name, checking under bridges and in drainage culverts. They found nothing. As January turned to February, a new problem emerged. Without a clear suspect or actionable leads, the investigation began to stall. The DNA results from the trunk blood came back. The sample was too degraded by cold and moisture to yield a usable profile. The hair from the driver's seat contained follicle tissue, enough for mitochondrial DNA testing, but that process would take weeks and only provide a maternal lineage match, less precise than nuclear DNA. The unidentified thumbprint on the rearview mirror remained the best piece of evidence, but with no match in any database, It was a clue without context. Brennan requested that Jennifer's apartment be processed for comparison prints. Perhaps the thumbprint belonged to a friend, a maintenance worker, someone with innocent access to the car. Technicians lifted over 60 prints from Jennifer's apartment. None matched the mystery print from the mirror. On February 8th, 2 weeks after Jennifer vanished, Detective Brennan sat in his office reviewing the case file. The stack of reports had grown thick. Witness statements, forensic analyses, tip summaries, search grids. Yet for all the activity, the core question remained unanswered. Who took Jennifer Kesse, and where was she now? The Kesse family refused to accept silence as an answer. Drew hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Thomas Garrett, to work parallel to the police investigation. Joyce organized weekly vigils at Monument Square in downtown Portland, where supporters gathered with candles and photos of Jennifer. Logan created a website, findjenniferkesse.org, posting updates, appeals, and a timeline of the case. The site received thousands of visits. Messages poured in from across Maine and beyond. Strangers offering prayers, amateur detectives suggesting theories, psychics claiming visions. But beneath the public support, whispers began. In coffee shops and online forums, some questioned whether Jennifer had walked away from her life intentionally. Financial stress, secret relationships, hidden troubles. Speculation filled the void left by facts. The rumors wounded the Kesse family deeply. People who didn't know Jennifer are writing stories about her, Joyce said during a vigil, her voice shaking with anger and grief. Our daughter wouldn't abandon us. She was taken. Someone knows what happened. Detective Brennan believed her. Everything about the evidence pointed to foul play. The blood, the moved car, the hooded figure, the missing personal items. But belief wasn't proof, and without proof, the case drifted toward the one outcome every investigator dreads. It was becoming cold. By March 2006, the investigation into Jennifer Kesse's disappearance had settled into a rhythm that felt more like defeat than progress. Detective Michael Brennan still worked the case daily, but the leads had thinned to a trickle. The hooded figure in the security footage remained unidentified, despite thousands of tips. The thumbprint on the rearview mirror sat in the evidence locker, a clue waiting for a match that never came. The mitochondrial DNA from the hair found on the driver's seat finally returned results in mid-March. It indicated a maternal lineage consistent with Northern European ancestry, shared by roughly 40% of Maine's population. Too broad to narrow suspects. Brennan requested the case remain active, but department resources were finite. New crimes demanded attention. Robberies, assaults, a homicide in Bayside that consumed the major crimes unit for 3 weeks. By April, Jennifer's file was moved to a metal cabinet in the cold case storage room, a fluorescent-lit space in the police station's basement, where unsolved mysteries accumulated like sediment. The transition happened without announcement or ceremony. One day, Brennan carried the thick folder downstairs, slid it on a shelf between a 2003 arson and a 2005 hit-and-run, and felt something inside him calcify. The Kesse family fought back against the silence. Drew took a leave of absence from his engineering job to focus entirely on finding Jennifer. He spent hours each day reviewing tips that came through the website, following up on leads the police deemed too tenuous to pursue. A caller from Lewiston claimed to have seen Jennifer at a rest stop in February. Drew drove there, showed her photo to staff, reviewed parking lot footage. Nothing. Another tip suggested Jennifer might have been spotted boarding a bus to Boston. Drew called every bus company, sent Jennifer's photo to terminal managers, walked through South Station, asking strangers if they'd seen his daughter. Every lead dissolved into frustration. Joyce organized monthly vigils at Monument Square. In the beginning, dozens attended, friends, neighbors, co-workers, strangers moved by Jennifer's story. By summer, attendance had dwindled. 10 people, then 5. One rainy evening in August, Joyce stood alone under a streetlight holding a candle and a photo of Jennifer. A few passersby glanced over but kept walking. Umbrellas angled against the drizzle. The isolation cut deeper than the rain. Logan returned to his graduate program in environmental science, but his focus had shattered. He'd stare at textbooks without reading, sit through lectures without hearing. At night, he'd open findjenniferkesse.org and refresh the page compulsively, hoping for new information. The site's traffic had dropped from thousands of daily visitors to a few dozen. Comment sections filled with armchair detectives rehashing old theories, or worse, blaming Jennifer for her own disappearance. Logan disabled comments after someone wrote, "She probably ran off with a boyfriend and doesn't want to be found." The cruelty of strangers felt like a second abduction, this time of Jennifer's memory. In the Portland community, Jennifer's case became a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties and parent meetings. "Remember that young woman who vanished?" people would say, shaking their heads. "Never found her." The story was invoked whenever someone's daughter moved to the city, a reminder to be careful, to watch surroundings, to check in regularly. But as months passed, Jennifer herself faded from collective memory. Her flyers, once plastered across Old Port storefronts, were covered by concert posters and yard sale signs. The missing person reports on local news shifted to new cases: a teenager who disappeared from Westbrook, an elderly man with dementia who wandered from a care facility. Jennifer's name appeared less frequently than not at all. By the first anniversary of her disappearance, in January 2007, the Kessie family held a memorial service at St. Maximilian Colby Church in Scarborough. Roughly 30 people attended, mostly relatives and a few loyal friends. Detective Brennan came, standing in the back pew with his coat folded over his arm. He'd thought about this case every week since it went cold, reviewing the file during slow afternoons, wondering what he'd missed. When Drew approached him after the service, Brennan saw the weight of a year's grief etched into the man's face. "Anything new?" Drew asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I wish I had better news. We're still monitoring for any breaks. If the thumbprint ever matches someone in the system, if new witnesses come forward, the case isn't closed, Drew. It's just waiting." Waiting. The word hung between them like a life sentence. As years accumulated, the waiting became a permanent condition. The Kesser family marked time in anniversaries. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years since Jennifer vanished. Each January 24th, they gathered at Monument Square, often alone or with 1 or 2 supporters. They'd light candles, share memories, and renew their vow not to forget. But the city around them moved on. Portland's population grew. New businesses opened along Congress Street. The Old Port District underwent renovations. Huntington on the Park, where Jennifer's car was found, changed ownership and was rebranded as Harbor Heights. The visitor lot was repaved, erasing even the physical space where her Honda had sat. Logan graduated with his master's degree in 2008 and took a job with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. He married in 2010, had a daughter in 2012. Life proceeded forward, but Jennifer's absence shadowed every milestone. At his wedding, an empty chair sat at the family table with Jennifer's photo propped against a white rose. When his daughter was born, he named her Jennifer Logan Kessie, a middle name carrying the weight of an unsolved mystery. Drew and Joyce aged in ways that went beyond years. Photographs from 2006 showed a couple in their early 50s, faces lined but hopeful. By 2015, they looked a decade older. Drew's hair fully white, Joyce's eyes carrying a permanent exhaustion. They'd transformed their spare bedroom into a command center for Jennifer's case. Walls covered with maps, timelines, photos, and printed tip summaries. Every evening, Drew would sit in that room for an hour, reviewing documents as if repetition might reveal something previously invisible. Detective Brennan retired from the Portland Police Department in 2014. On his last day, he visited the cold case storage room, pulled Jennifer's file, and read through it one final time. The folder had grown thicker over the years: supplemental reports, follow-up interviews, dead-end tips. But the core mystery remained unchanged. A 24-year-old woman left her apartment at 7:40 a.m., spoke to her brother at 7:41 a.m., and vanished. Her car appeared 3 miles away, driven by an unidentified figure. A small blood sample, a stray hair, an unknown thumbprint. Clues that led nowhere. Brennan placed the file back on the shelf, his hand lingering on the folder tab. He'd worked hundreds of cases in his career, solved most, but the unsolved ones haunted differently. They were the names that surfaced at 3 a.m., the faces that appeared in checkout lines when someone's profile matched just slightly. Jennifer Kesse was one of those faces. He knew she always would be. In December 2015, nearly 10 years after Jennifer disappeared, a new detective named Sarah Chen was assigned to Portland's cold case unit. She was 34, methodical, and drawn to the work specifically because she believed old cases could still yield answers if approached with fresh perspective. On her first day, she requested access to the cold case files. Her supervisor, Lieutenant David Park, walked her to the storage room and gestured at the metal cabinets. "Pick any file. They're all waiting for someone to care again." Sarah scanned the shelves, reading names and dates. Her eyes stopped on a folder labeled Kesse, Jennifer, missing 01-24-2006. She pulled it out, felt its weight, and carried it back to her desk. That evening, long after other detectives had gone home, Sarah sat under the fluorescent lights of the cold case unit office and began to read. By page 30, she'd made a decision. This case wasn't dead. It was dormant. And maybe, just maybe, 10 years later, technology and persistence could wake it. Detective Sarah Chen spent her first month in the cold case unit immersed in Jennifer Kesse's file. She read every witness statement, studied every photograph, reviewed the grainy security footage of the hooded figure frame by frame. What struck her most wasn't what the investigation had found, it's what it hadn't been done. In 2006, forensic technology was a fraction of what existed in 2015. The blood sample from the trunk had been too degraded for a full DNA profile then, but extraction methods had advanced dramatically. The mitochondrial DNA from the hair had provided only maternal lineage, but newer techniques could potentially yield nuclear DNA if follicle cells remained. Most importantly, the unidentified thumbprint had been run through databases nearly a decade ago. Thousands of new profiles had been added since. Sarah's first action was to request the physical evidence be retrieved from storage. On a cold morning in January 2016, exactly 10 years after Jennifer vanished, she stood in the evidence room as a technician unlocked a climate-controlled locker. Inside, sealed in plastic bags with chain of custody tags, sat the carpet segment from Jennifer's trunk containing the bloodstain, the clear envelope holding the single hair, and the fingerprint card with the partial thumbprint lifted from the rearview mirror. "I want everything sent to the State Crime Lab with the request for reanalysis using current technology. Priority on the thumbprint and DNA samples." The request took 2 weeks to process through bureaucratic channels, but by early February the evidence was in Augusta. Sarah personally called the lab supervisor, Dr. Martin Wells, explaining the case history and her belief that modern techniques might extract information previously unavailable. Dr. Wells, a forensic scientist with 30 years' experience, agreed to personally oversee the re-examination. While waiting for lab results, Sarah pursued another angle. She'd noticed in the original investigation file that Detective Brennan had canvassed Jennifer's apartment building in Huntington on the Park, but the canvass had been limited to residents present at the time. Sarah wanted to know who had been living in both locations. In January 2006, every tenant, every maintenance worker, every contractor. She submitted requests to both property management companies for historical tenant records and employee rosters from 2005-2006. The responses arrived in March. Jennifer's building on Monjoy Hill had housed 42 units in 2006, with a maintenance staff of 3 and a rotating roster of contractors for renovations. Huntington on the Park, now Harbor Heights, had been larger, with 96 units, a maintenance crew of 5, and extensive construction work underway in early 2006 to add a fitness center. Sarah cross-referenced the names against Maine's criminal database. Most came back clean, but one name triggered an alert. Marcus Hole, 38 in 2006, had worked as a maintenance technician at Huntington on the Park from November 2005 through March 2006. He had a prior arrest in 2003 for assault, charges later dropped, and a history of moving between buildings in Portland's property management network. More significantly, his employment at Huntington on the Park had ended abruptly on February 3, 2006, just 10 days after Jennifer's car was found in the complex's visitor lot. The termination paperwork cited inappropriate conduct, but details were vague. Sarah dug deeper. She located Holloway's current address, a rental house in South Portland, and ran his fingerprints through the system. They'd been on file since the 2003 arrest. She submitted a formal request to compare Holloway's prints with the unidentified thumbprint from Jennifer's car. The comparison would take several days. On March 18, 2016, Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Wells from the State Crime Lab. "Detective Chen, I have preliminary results on the Kessie evidence. You're going to want to see this in person." Sarah drove to Augusta that afternoon. In the lab's sterile conference room, Dr. Wells spread out analysis reports across the table. "We used improved DNA extraction methods on the blood sample from the trunk. The original analysis in 2006 failed because the sample was degraded by cold and moisture. But we applied a new amplification technique that targets shorter DNA sequences, more resistant to degradation. We got a partial profile, not complete, but enough to search databases." Sarah leaned forward. "And no match in CODIS or state databases? However, the profile is male, and we can use it for comparison if you develop a suspect." Sarah nodded, absorbing this. "What about the hair?" Dr. Wells pulled out another report. "The hair from the driver's seat yielded better results. We extracted nuclear DNA from follicle cells. Again, no match in existing databases, but we have a full profile, male, consistent with Caucasian ancestry. Here's where it gets interesting. We ran the profile through a genetic genealogy database. It's a newer investigative tool. We can identify potential relatives through shared DNA markers." Sarah's pulse quickened. She'd read about genetic genealogy, the technique that had cracked decades-old cases across the country, most famously the Golden State Killer investigation in California. "What did you find?" "The DNA matches a family cluster in Maine, surnamed Fletcher. We identified 17 potential relatives, ranging from second to fourth cousins. I've compiled a family tree tracing back to a common ancestor in the mid-1800s. From there, we can narrow down to individuals who would be the right age and location in 2006. Dr. Wells slid a printout across the table. It showed a genealogical chart, names branching out like a river delta. Sarah stared at it, feeling something she hadn't felt in the 3 months since opening Jennifer's file: genuine hope. Back in Portland, Sarah spent the next week working with a genealogist to narrow the Fletcher family tree. They focused on males born between 1960 and 1985, the age range consistent with the hooded figure's build in the security footage. They cross-referenced names with Portland residency records from 2006. 3 names emerged as possibilities. One lived in Augusta in 2006, too far from Portland to be viable. Another had been deployed overseas with the military in January 2006. The third name stopped Sarah cold. Ryan Fletcher, 34 in 2006, had lived in an apartment in Portland's Parkside neighborhood, 2 miles from Jennifer's building. Employment records showed he'd worked sporadically as a handyman and contractor. More troubling, he had a 1999 arrest for stalking, charges dismissed after the complainant moved out of state, and in March 2006, Ryan Fletcher had abruptly left Maine, relocating to New Hampshire with no forwarding address. Sarah immediately requested Ryan Fletcher's last known address in New Hampshire and submitted a request for surveillance. While that was being arranged, Sarah received the fingerprint comparison results. Marcus Holloway's prints did not match the thumbprint from Jennifer's car. Dead end. But Ryan Fletcher's name now glowed like a beacon. On April 2nd, Sarah drove to the Kessie home in Yarmouth. She hadn't contacted the family before now, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but the DNA evidence in Ryan Fletcher's profile warranted an update. Drew answered the door, older and wearier than the photos in the case file. When Sarah introduced herself and explained she'd reopened Jennifer's case, Drew's eyes filled with tears. 10 years, he said, his voice breaking. "We thought everyone had forgotten." Sarah sat with Drew and Joyce in their living room, the same room that had become a shrine to Jennifer's memory. Photos covered every surface. The command center Drew had built remained intact upstairs, maps and timelines unchanged. Sarah carefully explained the DNA reanalysis, the genetic genealogy breakthrough, and Ryan Fletcher's name.
"We're very close," Sarah said. "But I need to be honest. We don't have enough for an arrest yet. We need to place Fletcher in contact with Jennifer or her car. We need more evidence." Joyce gripped her husband's hand. "After all this time, just knowing someone is working the case again, it means everything." As Sarah left the Kessie home, she felt the weight of their decade-long vigil settle onto her own shoulders. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a promise. She would find Ryan Fletcher. She would uncover the truth, and she would bring Jennifer home. Detective Sarah Chen established surveillance on Ryan Fletcher in mid-April 2016. He was living in Manchester, New Hampshire, in a two-bedroom rental on the eastern edge of the city. Local police provided unmarked units to monitor his movements, while Sarah coordinated with New Hampshire authorities to build a legal framework for the investigation. She needed ironclad evidence before approaching Fletcher directly. One misstep could destroy the case she'd spent months constructing. Fletcher worked as an independent contractor, taking odd jobs through online platforms: drywall repair, appliance installation, deck building. His schedule was erratic, which made surveillance challenging. Some days he'd leave his apartment at dawn, returning after dark. Other days he wouldn't emerge at all. Surveillance teams photographed him at hardware stores, job sites, a diner where he ate lunch most Tuesdays. He was thin, just under 6 feet tall, with graying brown hair and a habit of keeping his head down when walking, mannerisms that matched the hooded figure from the 2006 security footage. Sarah needed Fletcher's DNA to compare against the profile extracted from the hair in Jennifer's car. She couldn't compel a sample without probable cause for arrest, so she relied on an old investigative technique: collecting discarded items. On April 22nd, surveillance officers watched Fletcher eat lunch at Murphy's Tavern in Manchester. He ordered a burger and beer, paid cash, and left. The moment he exited, an undercover officer entered, identified himself to the manager, and requested the bottle he'd drunk from. It was sealed in an evidence bag within minutes. The bottle was couriered to the Maine State Crime Lab that evening.
Dr. Wells processed it personally, swabbing the bottle's rim for saliva cells. DNA extraction took 3 days. On April 26th, he called Sarah with results that made her grip the phone tighter. It's a match. The DNA from Fletcher's beer bottle is identical to the DNA from the hair found in Jennifer Kess's car. No margin for error. This is definitive. Sarah exhaled slowly. After 10 years, they had him. Ryan Fletcher had been in Jennifer's car. But that single fact, while damning, wasn't enough for a murder charge. She needed more witness testimony, physical evidence linking Fletcher to Jennifer's abduction, or, ideally, a confession. Sarah coordinated with the Portland Police Department and New Hampshire State Police to plan Fletcher's arrest. They would execute it simultaneously with a search warrant for his Manchester apartment. The goal was to find anything connecting Fletcher to Jennifer: photos, personal items, documents, digital evidence. Sarah also requested that Fletcher's 1999 stalking case file be retrieved from archives. If there was a pattern of behavior, it might strengthen the prosecution. On May 3, 2016, at 6:15 a.m., a tactical team surrounded Fletcher's apartment. Sarah stood in the command vehicle, parked a block away, listening to radio chatter. At 6:20, officers breached the door. "Police search warrant, hands where we can see them." Fletcher was still in bed when they entered. He sat up confused and blinking as officers secured the apartment. Within minutes, he was handcuffed and read his rights. His expression shifted from confusion to cold calculation as the charges were explained. Kidnapping and murder in connection with Jennifer Kess's 2006 disappearance. Fletcher said nothing, his jaw set, eyes forward. While Fletcher was transported to the Manchester Police Department for initial processing, forensic teams swept his apartment. It was sparsely furnished: a couch, a bed, a card table serving as a desk. The walls were bare, except for a calendar from a tool supply company. But in the bedroom closet, investigators found a cardboard box that stopped them cold. Inside were newspaper clippings about Jennifer's disappearance, articles from the Portland Press-Herald, printed pages from findjenniferkessie.org, photos of Jennifer downloaded from news sites. Some were dated 2006, yellowed with age. Others were more recent, suggesting Fletcher had been monitoring the case for a decade. Beneath the clippings, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was Jennifer's briefcase, the leather one she'd been carrying in the security footage on January 24, 2006.
Sarah received a call from the forensic lead at 8:47 a.m. "Detective, we have the briefcase. Her initials are embossed on the side, JK. We're processing it for prints and trace evidence now." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a decade of weight lift slightly. They had him. Not just DNA, but Jennifer's actual belongings in Fletcher's possession. This was no longer circumstantial, this was proof. Fletcher was extradited to Maine. 2 days later, on May 5th, he sat in an interrogation room at the Portland Police Department, handcuffed to the table, a public defender beside him. Sarah entered with Lieutenant Park in a recording device. She placed the case file on the table, thick, worn, 10 years of work condensed into paper. "Ryan, you know why you're here," Sarah began, her voice calm. "We found Jennifer Kess's briefcase in your apartment. Your DNA was in her car. We have 10 years of evidence pointing to you. This is your chance to tell the truth." Fletcher stared at the table, silent. His attorney leaned in, whispering something. Fletcher shook his head slightly. Sarah continued. "You worked as a contractor in Portland in 2006. You knew the area, you knew how to move around without being noticed. On January 24th, Jennifer left her apartment at 7:40 a.m. You were there, weren't you?" Fletcher's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sarah opened the file, pulling out the security footage stills. The hooded figure exiting Jennifer's car at Huntington on the Park. "This is you. We have your height, your build, your gait analyzed by experts, and we have your DNA in her car. You can stay silent, but the evidence speaks for you." Minutes stretched. The only sound was the hum of the recording device. Then, almost imperceptibly, Fletcher's shoulders sagged. He looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes for the first time. "I want a deal," he said, voice flat. His attorney immediately interjected, but Fletcher held up his cuffed hands. "I want immunity from the death penalty, then I'll tell you what happened." Sarah's heart pounded, but her expression remained neutral. "That's not my decision, but if you cooperate fully, if you tell us where Jennifer is, the prosecutor will consider it." Fletcher leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "She fought. I didn't expect that." The room fell silent. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "Tell us everything." Over the next 2 hours, Ryan Fletcher confessed he'd been hired to do repair work at Jennifer's apartment building in late 2005. He'd seen her in the lobby, become fixated, started watching her routines. On the morning of January 24th, he'd waited in the parking lot, knowing she left around 7:40 a.m. When she approached her car, he confronted her, trying to force her into his vehicle. Jennifer screamed, fought, scratched his face. He panicked, struck her with a wrench he'd been carrying. She collapsed, he put her in his truck, drove to a construction site in Westbrook, and buried her beneath concrete being poured for a warehouse foundation. The next day, he moved her car to Huntington on the Park to misdirect the investigation. When Fletcher finished, the interrogation room felt airless. Sarah forced herself to speak. "Where exactly is the construction site?" Fletcher provided an address. Sarah immediately related to units waiting outside. Within an hour, ground-penetrating radar was being deployed at the site, now a completed warehouse distribution center.
The warehouse in Westbrook stood on Industrial Park Drive, a gray concrete structure housing medical supply distribution. It had been completed in April 2006, 3 months after Jennifer vanished. Detective Sarah Chen stood in the parking lot on May 6, 2016, watching a forensic team set up ground-penetrating radar equipment. The warehouse manager, a nervous man in his 50s, kept asking what was happening. Sarah told him only that they were investigating a cold case. The radar operator, a specialist from the state police, moved the equipment slowly across a section of the warehouse floor that Fletcher had identified. The device sent electromagnetic pulses into the concrete, measuring variations in density. After 40 minutes, the operator stopped and marked a spot with orange spray paint. "There's a void here. Something's buried beneath the foundation." Breaking through commercial-grade concrete required specialized equipment. A crew arrived with jackhammers and cutting tools. Drew and Joyce Kessie were notified, but asked to wait at home. Sarah didn't want them present until they knew what lay beneath. The excavation began at noon and continued into the evening. At 6:47 p.m., as daylight faded, a technician's shovel struck something solid. Carefully, they cleared away dirt and debris. Skeletal remains emerged. A skull, partially intact. Rib cage, long bones, fragments of fabric, navy blue, consistent with the wool coat Jennifer had worn. And there, among the bones of the left hand, a thin silver ring with a small sapphire stone. Drew had given it to Jennifer for her college graduation. Dr. Wells arrived to supervise the recovery. Every bone was photographed in place, then carefully lifted and placed in evidence containers. The process took hours. By midnight, Jennifer Kessie's remains were in the medical examiner's van, headed to Augusta for formal identification. Sarah stood alone in the warehouse after everyone left, staring at the hole in the concrete. 10 years. Jennifer had been here the entire time, beneath the feet of workers loading trucks, beneath fluorescent lights, and the ordinary business of living. The injustice of it pressed against Sarah's chest until she could barely breathe. DNA confirmation came 2 days later. The remains were definitively Jennifer Cass. Cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with Fletcher's confession. Sarah drove to Yarmouth to deliver the news in person. Drew answered the door, saw her expression, and simply nodded. He'd known. They'd all known, really. Hope had died years ago. This was just the formality of truth. Joyce sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap. "Can we bring her home now?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," Sarah said. "She's coming home." Ryan Fletcher's arraignment took place on May 12th. He entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and kidnapping in exchange for life imprisonment without parole, avoiding trial and the possibility of the death penalty. The courtroom was packed. Drew, Joyce, and Logan sat in the front row. When the judge read the sentence, Drew's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Logan held his father's hand. Joyce stared at Fletcher, her face a mask of controlled fury. Fletcher was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood shackled and looked toward the Kessie family. "I can't undo what I did," he said, voice flat. "I took someone you loved. I'm sorry." The words landed hollow, insufficient against a decade of grief. As guards let Fletcher away, Joyce whispered, "Sorry doesn't bring her back." The press coverage was immediate and intense. Headlines across Maine and national outlets ran the same variations of the story. Decade-old cold case solved. Genetic genealogy cracks Jennifer Kessie mystery. Sarah Chen was featured in articles, though she deflected attention, emphasizing the forensic scientists and the Kessie family's perseverance. In interviews, she repeatedly stated, "Jennifer never gave up. She left us the evidence we needed. She fought, and that fight brought justice." Jennifer's funeral took place on May 21, 2016, at Calvary Cemetery in South Portland. Hundreds attended. Family, old friends from college, co-workers from Merrill Lynch, strangers who'd followed her case online. The white casket, covered in white roses and lilies, was lowered into the ground as a bagpiper played Amazing Grace. Drew spoke briefly, his voice breaking. Jennifer was organized, kind, and brave. She fought for her life, and she waited 10 years for us to find her. Now she can rest. A headstone was placed 3 weeks later. It read, "Jennifer Marie Kessie, 1981-2006. Beloved daughter, sister, friend. Her courage brought justice." The case sparked national discussions about cold case investigations and the power of genetic genealogy. Police departments across the country requested training on the techniques Sarah had employed. The Kessie family established the Jennifer Kessie Cold Case Foundation, providing grants to families seeking genetic genealogy analysis for unsolved cases. Logan became the foundation's director, channeling a decade of grief into action. Sarah Chen received a commendation from the Portland Police Department, but remained uncomfortable with the attention. In a quiet moment, she visited Jennifer's grave alone, placing a single white rose on the fresh earth. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said to the stone, "but you're home now." The case left scars on Portland's collective memory. The illusion of small city safety had been shattered, not once but twice. First by Jennifer's abduction, then by the revelation that her killer had lived among them undetected for months before fleeing. Community meetings addressed safety protocols, building security, and public vigilance. The conversations were difficult but necessary. Acknowledgement that evil can wear familiar faces. For Drew and Joyce Kessie, closure was a complicated concept. Jennifer's return brought relief but not peace. The empty chair at Thanksgiving remained empty, now filled with memory rather than hope. They visited her grave weekly, bringing flowers and sitting on the bench Drew had installed. Sometimes they talked to her, sometimes they sat in silence. Grief, they learned, doesn't end, it just changes shape.
A year after Jennifer's burial, on May 21, 2017, a memorial ceremony was held at Monument Square. Nearly 1,000 people attended. Family, old friends from college, co-workers from Merrill Lynch, strangers who'd followed her case online. A speaker from the Cold Case Foundation read Jennifer's story aloud, emphasizing not just her death but her life, the marathon she had run, the book she had loved, the precision with which she had approached everything, the brother she had called every morning. When the reading finished, the crowd stood in silence, candles flickering like a constellation of small, persistent lights against the darkness. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. She thought about the moment she had first opened Jennifer's file, the weight of it in her hands, the sense that someone was waiting to be heard. She had given Jennifer a voice again. That was what mattered. Not the commendations or the headlines, but the simple fact that a woman who'd fought to survive had finally been recognized, remembered, and brought home. As the candles were extinguished and the crowd dispersed, Drew approached Sarah. He handed her a photo. Jennifer at her college graduation, cap tilted, smile radiant. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not forgetting." Sarah took the photo, feeling its weight. She made it impossible to forget. Oh, in the years that followed, Jennifer Kessie's case became a teaching example in forensic science programs and cold case seminars. But beyond the technical discussions, it remained a deeply human story of a family's refusal to surrender, of science offering redemption where institutions had failed, and of a young woman whose final act of resistance, scratching her attacker's face and leaving his DNA beneath her nails, ensured that truth would eventually emerge. Justice had been delayed, but it had not been denied.